Hello everyone, welcome to the Hindu analysis for 4th February 2021. Let us start with the first article. Government notice to Twitter on farm genocide hashtag. So, for the past few days, there were few hashtags and few accounts which were posting information that may be deemed as inciting violence, meaning they were more critical, and in some aspects, in certain hashtags, they were encouraging people to revolt against the government. Particularly, one hashtag was promoting farmer genocide. So, this is against the government, not against the farmers. So, the union government has decided to issue notices to Twitter to take down those URL links, accounts, and remove the hashtag altogether from the platform itself. Initially, Twitter agreed and removed all those accounts and hashtags from the Twitter platform. But after 24 hours, without consulting with the government of India, they restored those hashtags, accounts, and URLs. To which the government said, they had a meeting, and Twitter said that you have no grounds to request such takedowns, because whatever the accounts were posting were not violating their terms of use, so they cannot suppress or delete those accounts. As a reaction to it, the union government has issued a notice to Twitter to comply with its order for removal of content related to the hashtag farmers genocide. So the government said that in its notice, said that the material was designed to spread misinformation, to inflame passions and hatred, and warned that refusal to do so may invite penal action. This, the government is warning to Twitter that whatever we are asking to take down, please take down, otherwise you will have to face the wrath of law, meaning you will invite some penal action from the government of India. So, as I said earlier, unilaterally, without consulting with the government of India, they restored over 250 accounts after hours of blocking them due to legal demand. So, when first Twitter took down those accounts, their official statement was that the government requested them, and there was some legal demand from the government of India to take down those accounts, so we did. But later, after 24 hours or after some time, they restored those deleted accounts without, as I said earlier, consulting the government of India. To which, again, in the notice served to the Twitter company, government reiterated that Twitter was an intermediary and was obliged to follow the directions of government, and refusal to do so may invite penal action. Again, the government here is clearly stating that you are an intermediary, meaning you are a link between the government and the people. You are nothing more than an intermediary, meaning you are just the link. So you have to follow the rules and abide by the rules set by the government of India. So what are the legal basis for the government of India issuing a notice or serving a notice to a private company and threatening them with penal action? What would be the penal action if the government decides to go forward with punishing Twitter for not adhering to its demands? So coming back to it, Section 69A of the Information Technology Act 2000 is the ground on which the government sent the notice and wants to initiate action if Twitter doesn't meet the demands. So it says that on the ground that these are spreading misinformation about protests and has potential to lead to imminent violence affecting public order situation in the country. So this section says that if the government deems that there is any affecting public order situation, they can take necessary steps through this specific section from the IT Act of 2000. So again, the center in its notice quoted more than half a dozen Supreme Court judgments, including of constitutional benches, as to which is public order and what are the rights of authorities. So whatever the demand or whatever the notice that the government sent was not something pulled out of thin air. They did with some logic behind it, because there are certain Supreme Court judgments which state or define what public order means and what are the rights of authorities to protect that public order from disturbances. So they were very clear cut. The government of India or the particularly the Ministry of IT, Information and Technology, had some legal backing to their demand, because there are certain precedences set by the Supreme Court stating what constitutes public order or what constitutes disturbance to public order, and in such scenarios what are the rights and duties of a officer who is relegated with the authority to look after the public order. So they had some legal backing, right? So using those Supreme Court orders, they said these are the orders that support our demand. We are not doing this in a haphazard way. We have legal backing also. That is what they specifically quoted in that order also. They quoted half a dozen Supreme Court judgments in the notice served to the Twitter company. Coming back to the legal aspect of it, Section 69A states that the rule as applicable only the subjective satisfaction of the Secretary, Ministry of Information and Technology, and the committee is relevant, and the satisfaction / judgment of the intermediary itself has no relevance. Further, there is no onus of proof on MEITY, and Twitter, being an intermediary, cannot assume the role of a court in contravention of the statutory rules as applicable. In short, the section clearly states that the power rests with the authorities, not with the companies. And when the authorities request something from the intermediary, particularly here the Twitter corporation, they don't have to present any proof, because the onus of presenting proof is not on the MUIT. So they don't need to present proof. All they have to do is just request or pass an order stating somebody to do something, particularly in terms of information. Again, they are also stating that you, Twitter, are an intermediary. You cannot question this. You cannot oppose this order, and you cannot assume the role of any court in contravention of the statutory rules that are applicable in this particular case. So all the law and the precedent seems to be weighing in the side of the government, meaning the authorities who are requesting Twitter to take down the accounts and messages, that the government seems to believe that as a threat to the safety of the public in our country. Another provision in the same section is Section 69A Clause 3, provided for specific penal consequences in case of non-compliance of directions issued under Section 69A of the Act. So all these requests or orders that were passed were under 69A. But the government is also saying that we are going to punish you if you don't follow our request or order. So that comes under Section 69A Clause 3. Clause 3 specifically provides for penal consequences in only cases of non-compliance, which the Twitter is doing here. The government gave an order, the Twitter is non-complying with the order, stating that you have no grounds to ask us to do so. So that is what the notice seems to be. It can go both ways. See, if Twitter realizes what the legal capacity of the government of India is and takes down those accounts again, it is in clear. It might not attract any legal action. But if Twitter persists to say that we are going to keep those accounts online because they don't violate our terms of use and terms of policy, it is going to attract penal action. For the past few years, since US elections, social media companies, particularly Twitter and Facebook, were being attacked in a sense for manipulation of information. Particularly in South African country of Uganda, the government itself came out with an order stating for blocking of both Facebook and Twitter till the elections are completed. So now governments all around the world see social media companies as a threat to public order indirectly and a threat to information, in a sense that the platforms being used to manipulate public opinion through campaigns of and mass campaigns of misinformation. So we have to wait and see how the Twitter responds in this case and how the government is going to materialize its threat of penal action here. Coming to the next article, in JMI, police should have shown restraint. So during the anti-CAA riots that took place in Delhi, There was this particular case of JMU University where the anti-CAA protesters ran into the university and hid themselves. So the police or the responding police force entered the university and performed lathi charge over the protesters, and in the chaos of the mist, students were also assaulted. So when this happened, there was a widespread criticism from all forms of all sectors of society, including so what happened was, the university officials approached the local police station stating that the police force which entered the university to control the to arrest or to control the anti-CAA protesters destroyed university property. The local police station did not take necessary action. So instead of seeing that as a reason, they went and approached a local Delhi court. After deliberations, a city court remarked that though the Delhi police used more force than necessary in some instances while dealing with the December 2019 protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act at JMI, they were done in discharge of their official duties. The sitting judge observed that yes, there was some overuse of police force, but whatever the police were doing, whatever the actions that were implemented during that day were done in discharge of their official duty. The judge also pointed that yes, the police could have used less force, the police could have approached this in a different way where there was less collateral, there was less damage to the institution, or in other aspects there was less excess use of force. But he also noted that whatever the actions that the police took that day were in line with their duty, official duties, meaning they were there to control an out of control crowd. That was their duty, so they were doing nothing wrong. As I said earlier, some restraint should have been shown by the police. However, the lack of such restraint exhibited by the police and excesses committed in trying to control the situation are very much related to official duties of the respondents, that is the police here, because JMI filed a case against the police of Delhi. The court's observation came while dismissing the petition filed by the JMI. So, in a way, the sitting judge chided the police for use of excess force, while also stating that whatever they were doing out of necessity, because it is part of their duty to control out of control crowds and bring social order under control. It is an interesting judgment in a time where courts are being questioned over their judgments in the past few months. Coming to the next article, SC refuses to intervene in controversial conversion laws. So yesterday the Supreme Court refused to intervene immediately and examine the constitutional validity of the laws enacted by the state governments of Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand. Particularly in the case of Uttar Pradesh, prohibition of unlawful conversion of religion ordinance 2020. In the case of Uttarakhand, the Uttarakhand Freedom of Religion Act 2018. A NGO from Uttar Pradesh went and approached Supreme Court for intervention or complete scrappage of both the conversion or controversial conversion laws. But the Supreme Court said that, particularly a bench headed by Chief Justice of India Sharad A. Bobde, asked the petitioners to approach the respective high courts. He said that SC would like to have the benefits of high court's conclusion. So this is not the first time that the SC refused to take petitions on the controversial laws, because earlier some other NGOs approached Supreme Court for intervention in the implementation of the laws. But during that time also, earlier also, the Supreme Court said that particularly in that case, the petitioner was asking for the transfer of the case from Allahabad High Court to Supreme Court, which the Supreme Court denied, stating that already the Allahabad High Court is deliberating the issue. There is no need for us to intervene at this time and ask for transfer from Allahabad High Court to Supreme Court. So again, these laws are being challenged again. So they said there is some precedence to this. Here the Supreme Court stance seems to be that let high courts come out with their decision. If then we'll say what is our opinion on this, because they would like to have the opinion of high courts in this particular case, because it deals with certain controversial laws and two different states with different demographies are involved here. Coming to the next article, border dispute. Assam Mizoram border school damaged in blast. So this has been an ongoing tussle between the states of Assam and Mizoram. The situation has been like this since October 17 last year, where there was some skirmishes between between the villages between borders of Assam and Mizoram, where both sides were causing some trouble on either side of the border. But yesterday, a school on the restive Assam-Mizoram border was damaged in two bomb blasts triggered by unidentified miscreants on Wednesday afternoon. So this is in line with a sequence of events where property damage and injury to people has been the end result of both the skirmishes here. So again, the incident happened almost 7 months after another school was blown up amid a violent border row. As I said earlier, this decade-old dispute has been flared up in October 17, where some unidentified people from Mizoram came in, destroyed 20 shops, out of which 50 people were injured. In retaliation to that, a blockade was organized against Mizoram, an economic blockade by organization based in Assam, mostly student organizations, and through various rigorous negotiations and central government intervention, the blockade was lifted on October 22, but the situation deteriorated again on October 28, where certain fighting took place between both the sides. After again bringing down under control, after using much deliberation and use of force in certain areas, it has been controlled. As of now, according to the police, the situation is tense, but it is under control. It is a very much still fragile and developing scenario between the border of Assam and Mizoram, and central government is also keeping a close eye on the ground situation there. Coming to the next article, no to vaccine nationalism, yes to global cooperation. So, India's approach only reinforces the need for coordinated international efforts to bring COVID-19 under control. So, the new word in foreign policy or foreign diplomacy seems to be vaccine diplomacy. Vaccine diplomacy has become a hot topic in the recent times. So, what is the current problem here? The problem is, since coronavirus pandemic struck, almost all the countries who were earlier talking about globalization and globalism, almost immediately started talking about nationalism and protecting their own interests. So, since the inoculation drive started for coronavirus pandemic, with the vaccines being developed at a very fast pace, almost all developed countries started talking about protecting their own citizens from the virus, because economic interests were at stake there. So, what is the current scenario here? So, while the leading advanced countries have been mindlessly selfish in amassing approved vaccines, this development of vaccines and the vaccines being rolled out on experimental basis in some countries and fully rolled out in other countries, it's kick-started a new race between developed countries. You remember arms race, where each country was fighting for supremacy over weapons and ammunition and missiles and whatnot. Due to coronavirus pandemic, it morphed into a vaccine race, where each developed country, meaning the rich countries, were fighting over one another to secure stocks of vaccines. That is what happened in the here. So, the global south countries, India and China, have provided a ray of hope to most countries. What happened here is, when rich countries were fighting over vaccines, all these countries earlier who were saying that we'll protect global interests, we'll protect globalization, we'll protect small and underdeveloped and poor countries, immediately abandoned their say or stand in globalization pact and started securing vaccines for their own good, removing a greater chunk of availability of vaccine from the global market, leaving poor countries to fend for themselves. So let us say a company is producing 100 vaccines. These rich countries were fighting for 100 vaccines at a time. Some countries were successful in procuring 82 or 83%, meaning 80 or 90 vaccines, leaving only 10 vaccines to be sold to or given to poor countries. In that also, some other medium rich country came out and said that don't give those vaccines to them, we'll pay some more premium, give us that 10 vaccines, because we don't even have those 10 vaccines. So who are the losers here? Developing and poor nations, particularly of African countries and South American countries, who are already poor and struggling with economic downtroddenness or weakness in their economies, can no longer afford this race for vaccination. So in this scenario, only two countries, particularly India and China, whether you like China or not, at this stage, the only other country that has the capacity to support vaccination or provide vaccine vials is China. So India and China have provided a ray of hope to most countries. Particularly, as I said earlier, a report by New York Times based on the data on vaccine contracts compiled by Duke University shows that the advance purchase contracts made by some advanced countries for potential vaccines would vaccinate their population many times. So these rich countries were not only buying the vaccines, they are buying vaccines in huge volumes, enough that the population of that respective country can be vaccinated twice or thrice, in some cases 4 times. Meaning, if the country needs only 40 vaccines, this country was buying 120 vaccines. Beyond their need, driving up price, driving up demand, and drying up the market for poor countries. For example, the European Union 2 times, the United States and the United Kingdom 4 times, and Canada, the selfishest of all, 6 times. So the data again suggests that 82% of Pfizer's production in 2020 and 78% of Moderna's have already been advance purchased by rich countries. So they not only bought the stock that these companies were producing, they also bought future production rights also. Meaning, if the company is going to produce some amount of 1000 vaccines in the next year, that is 2021, that is current year, United States went ahead and bought 82 of those 820 vaccines out of those 1000 vaccines. And United Kingdom government went to some other vaccine manufacturer and said that we are going to buy 780 vaccines out of 1000 vaccines in advance, even though they were not even produced yet, but we'll buy anyway because we need that vaccines. So the expectation that an early vaccination will bring back normalcy and the required push to economic growth fueled many advanced countries to engage in vaccine battles. This is the new norm in international diplomacy, where people were fighting for vaccines, and during coronavirus they were fighting for PPEs, protective kits, ventilators and respiratory devices. Now, since there is no longer need for those PPE kits, masks and ventilator kits, the domain for battles has moved to vaccines. So the arguments of public good and global cooperation have gone out of the window. All these countries who are saying, particularly United States, European Union, UK, Canada, all these countries were saying, we are for torchbearers of globalism, we take care of poor countries, we see that developing countries will needs be addressed first, then we can take care of our own. That went out of the window as soon as vaccine production started. So while advanced countries have turned their back on need of poor countries to access COVID-19 vaccines, India has displayed empathy to their needs. So this word is important. The government of India started a campaign called Vaccine Maitri. Meaning, under Vaccine Maitri, the government of India is sending vaccines to almost all countries in the world on a grant basis. Meaning, the government of India is not charging a single rupee for the vaccines. Under the flag of Vaccine Maitri, they are sending vaccines to all the countries that are in need of vaccination. So India has taken up the position that is significant percentage of approved doses will be permitted for exports. The government of India has to do a very delicate balance of meeting the domestic demands all while maintaining a global perspective or safety of the global population also. So there is a lot of pushback from our own citizens that why are you sending vaccines that we need to other countries at this critical time. Despite facing criticism, whether you like the government or not, they are still sending vaccines to foreign countries all while maintaining a capable stock for domestic use. While its exports to neighbor countries will be under grant mode, meaning they are not charging anything, initial shipment of vaccines to least developed countries will be free of cost, and shipments of vaccines from India have already started reaching different parts of the developing world. Brazil, South Africa both received close to 2 million doses according to yesterday's estimate. Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal, Bhutan have all received their shipments of vaccine. Bangladesh also received a grand shipment of vaccine, but they went ahead and bought 10 million doses from Pfizer's vaccine, AstraZeneca's vaccine from Serum Institute of India. We are also sending vaccines to South African nations, particularly Sudan was one country that was particularly asking for vaccines. So our vaccine diplomacy under the name of Vaccine Maitri seems to be a success, because when rich countries turned their backs on poor countries, India was there to support them. Here comes the Chinese part. As I said earlier, India and China are the only countries that are sending vaccines to foreign countries. But with India, due to the price point of our vaccines and our stand in global level and our efficacy of our vaccines, there is a large demand for Indian manufactured vaccines. So export from India are helping other countries also initiating phase 1 of their vaccination program, a gesture well appreciated globally. This response manifests India's unstinted commitment to global development and has consolidated its name as the world pharmacy. China has also been enthusiastic in promising vaccines and their delivery. The lukewarm response by countries such as Nepal has slowed down the ambition of China. The attitude towards Indian vaccinating the populations in the poorer countries has generated discussion in richer countries about how the necessity for more proactive measures to roll out vaccines to developing nations. So we are setting a precedence where the richer countries are looking at us and saying, okay, that is some model that we may have to follow, and we will follow because it is working out well for the Indian population. So the reverse of progress may of many sustainable development goals. So this had a broader impact on sustainable development goals, where the entire idea behind sustainable development goals was the richer countries helping the poorer countries to equate or come to a level where they can generate their own or support their own growth. This has put a dent on helping poorer countries. So the sustainable development goals are also being tracked back due to the actions of richer countries. Particularly COVAX, co-led by Gavi, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI and WHO. So there needs to be a global organization that helps necessitating the transfer or shipment of vaccines from one nation to other nation globally. Particularly they need some structure who looks after the entire process of transportation or distribution of vaccines in the world. So COVAX is that organization. It is co-led by Gavi and CEPI, that is Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and World Health Organization. Its aim is to accelerate the development and manufacture of COVID-19 vaccines and to guarantee fair and equitable access for every country in the world. However, since high and middle income countries are buying up large amounts of vaccine directly from suppliers, the promise by COVAX to deliver 2 billion doses by the end of 2021 seems to face a new challenge. COVAX project can draw new pathways for global development. Their actions currently, what they are performing, will set precedents for future global cooperation or global development. So their entire COVAX plan, or the COVAX success, the organization of COVAX success depends on cheap vaccines. And the only country currently that is manufacturing cheap vaccines is India. One is Covishield from Serum Institute of India, the other is Covaxin from Bharat Biotech. For the past few months since Bharat Biotech's Covaxin got approval, a lot of noise has been made regarding the efficacy of the Covaxin, but a recent study by Lancet based on Covaxin's phase 1 data shows tolerable safety outcomes like any other vaccine. A Lancet study was done on Covaxin's efficacy. They came out and said that the results seem to be comparable to that of any other vaccine that was being developed by foreign countries. So whatever the questions that were raised regarding the efficacy of Covaxin seems to be false in a certain aspect. Again, the entire project of COVAX hinges upon the access to cheap vaccines. The ability to produce large volumes of vaccine at an affordable cost underlines India's importance to developing countries when it comes to drug access. The increasing nationalistic tendencies of the democratic world during the pandemic have challenged the positive narrative on global cooperation. So whatever the countries were talking about global cooperation and multilateralism went out of the window as soon as the pandemic hit. And it's a golden opportunity for government of India and India particularly to capture the demand and ensure that India as a nation has always been standing for global cooperation and multilateralism without any self-interest in a situation where the world is fighting for its survival. Coming to the next article, smart walls for Indian borders. So as you know, most of India's border infrastructure is crude and outdated and needs a major overhaul and rethink. In some areas of border wall in Kutch, that is Ran of Kutch, the border wall is just a fence with glass bottles tied to it. Because whenever a glass bottle is tied to the fence, if anything moves, they make noise and the noise is used as an indicator that somebody is trying to infiltrate India. This is not the case in all the places, few places. That is how crude our border wall is in certain places. In Himalayan, in higher upper regions of Himalaya, there is no wall at all because it is impossible to construct walls there. So and one of the major national security threats to India is infiltration from both sides, from Bangladesh and Pakistan. Currently we are also struggling with the same concept from the Chinese side also. So at this juncture we need a new plan to counter these infiltration bids and smuggling bids and questioning the authority of India at borders. So the government is thinking about setting up a virtual surveillance system that may help India secure its boundaries even in difficult locations. This is not a new idea. For example, US-Mexico border, a smart wall that replaces the physical and armed patrolling with advanced surveillance technology is proposed future for border security now. Earlier when Trump was president, he said that we are going to build a wall separating US and Mexico. Now the current US Biden administration came out and said that we are not going to build a wall, but we are going to build a smart wall. This is not something new. Earlier Trump's administration was also planning to build a smart wall in certain places, but now the Biden administration seems to have come out and said that we are going to implement it in far more larger scale. So what is this smart wall and what would it entail? The smart wall technology could solve border security issues without the need for a physical barrier. The wall would use sensors, radars and surveillance technology to detect and track border break-ins. A question that now arises is whether such a project can be undertaken to secure Indian borders. The answer is yes, we can certainly implement a smart border wall, and in certain sensitive areas along the Jammu and Kashmir areas, Union Territories of Jammu and Kashmir, A pilot scale smart wall has been already being implemented, where they are using thermal imaging cameras, motion sensors and drone technology for surveillance. So we are also used to it, but we have to scale it up and ramp it up in a short way so that our entire border is secured in the northern regions. As I said earlier, India has been struggling with the problems of terrorists and smugglers infiltrating into the country, and efforts are ongoing to secure our borders and curb cross-border infiltration. So this is one consideration from the government of India that has been on the table for the few days, and this is also one way that we can secure borders more securely and ensure the interests of India are protected. Coming to the next article, HAL gets contract for 83 LACs in 48,000 crore deal. We discussed this earlier yesterday, where out of 83 light combat aircrafts, that is Tejas Mk versions, 73 will be Mk1A fighter aircrafts, meaning they will be deployed in field to secure our skies. And 10 LAC Tejas Mk1 trainers will be bought to train the pilots of LACs. Out of 83, 73 are for use, 10 are for training. The variant that the government of India is buying from Hindustan Aeronautical Limited is Mk1A Tejas. So yesterday at Aero India 2021 Bengaluru, they signed an official agreement for the purchase of Tejas aircraft, and our Rakshana Mantri also started a second line of production at the Hindustan Aeronautical Limited for the production of Tejas. This is a boost in the arm for both HAL, because they are the topmost organizations that develop indigenous technologies for air warfare in India. They develop helicopters, they develop fighter jets. They are the producers of Sukhoi M30s Mk3 variants, and the last two Sukhois were delivered will be delivered by the end of this week, fulfilling the order for 100 Sukhois placed by the government of India earlier. And they also produce light combat helicopters, LCHs, that are being deployed in border areas, particularly high altitude areas. Coming to the next article, police seeks probe into role of RBI officials in bank scams. So BJP leader and member of parliament Subramania Swamy on Wednesday moved to the Supreme Court seeking a CBI probe into the role played by some officials of Reserve Bank of India in various banking scams plaguing the country. This is particularly interesting and noteworthy in the sense that there seems to be some evidence existing in the domain pointing fingers at officials of RBI in big banking scams that India has experienced in the past and is experiencing currently. So if that's the case, as you know, RBI is the governing authority of banking sector in India and financial sector and advisor to the government of India. If the officials are really in cahoots with defaulters and defaulting companies, that would be a major breach of trust in terms of organizational structure and trust in a sense. Coming to the next article, US extends New START nuclear treaty with Russia. So New START, yesterday US President Joe Biden administration on Wednesday extended the New START nuclear treaty with Russia by 5 years, saying it hoped to prevent an arms race despite rising tensions with Moscow. So the New START treaty is a treaty between the governments of United States of America and the Russian Federation on measures for further reduction and limitation of strategic offensive arms. So it was first entered into force on 5th February 2011. It is a successor to the START framework of 1991, which was signed at the end of the Cold War, which limited the both sides to 1600 strategic delivery vehicles and 6000 warheads. 1600 strategic delivery vehicles means ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. According to the 1991 START framework signed after the end of Cold War, the agreement limited both the sides to reduce their ICBMs number to 1600 and the number of warheads to 6000, meaning each country should have only 1600 ICBMs and 6000 nuclear capable nuclear warheads that go stop on the ICBMs. So it continues the bipartisan process of verifiably reducing US and Russian strategic nuclear arsenal by limiting both sides to 700 strategic launchers and 1550 operational warheads. The first START framework, which was signed in 1991, had 1600 strategic ICBMs and 6000 warheads. The new START treaty that was signed on 5th February of 2011 has brought down that number substantially to the both sides limiting and maintaining only 700 strategic launches, that is 700 ICBMs, and 1550 operational warheads, meaning that can be used readily, which is significant in nature. But in reality, both countries have been developing next generation weapons that are not covered in a treaty. The treaty only talks about nuclear weapons and arms race. But in reality, both US and Russia have been developing, particularly in the case of China, which this treaty doesn't talk about, have all been developing 5th generation, 6th generation supersonic missiles which are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. In a sense, in a particularly developing sense, the new START treaty is obsolete. Coming to the next article, Suu Kyi charged and remanded for 2 weeks. You are well aware there is a military coup going in Myanmar, and the ruling party, that democratically elected party that was headed by Aung San Suu Kyi, was formally arrested or toppled by a military dictatorship. She was arrested along with all the leaders of her party, including the president of Myanmar, and yesterday the military leadership that carried out the coup successfully has formally charged the leader for some bogus charges of export and import. They said that we found some walkie-talkies in her country, in her home, which were illegal to be held. On that charge, on that case, they filed a case and charged her with import and export violations, to which the courts of Myanmar have remanded for 2 weeks. This is a very much developing and fluid situation. There is a lot of international pressure on Myanmar to revert back to democracy, meaning the army moving back to barracks and restoring the democratically elected party. We have to see, as of now, India came out and said that we are appraising all the situations, and for India it's a particularly tricky issue because Myanmar shares a border with us, and we had a long issue with terrorists infiltrating through Myanmar. We have to wait and see how this event unfolds further. Thank you. Have a good day.